Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah's Pesachim, Perek Vav, Chapter 6, Mishnah Aleph, Mishnah 1. Okay. Elu Devarim. These are the things, these are the parts of the carbon Pesach, of the Paschal sacrifice, Doichenes HaShabbos, that override Shabbos. There is a drasha in the Torah, there are words in the Torah from which we derive that the carbon Pesach can be performed even on Shabbos. Okay. And now we go through which parts actually can override Shabbos and which parts do not. Shchitasai, it's slaughtering the animal. You can't slaughter an animal typically, but the carbon Pesach you could. Now I think it's interesting to note, I don't know if anybody mentioned it here, but the carbon Pesach, as we said, is really an individual sacrifice, right? Each and every person brings a carbon Pesach. It's not a communal sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Communal sacrifices, we know, like the carbon tamid, for instance. We know the carbon tamid is even on Shabbos. That's why it's called tamid. It's constant. It's always. And we have a way of deriving carbon Pesach from carbon tamid, which is how we know that a carbon Pesach, even though in some ways it's a private carbon, in some ways we treat it like a communal carbon, but the source to say that the carbon Pesach overrides Shabbos is because we have a way of deriving carbon Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, from the carbon tamid, from the daily sacrifice, the daily communal sacrifice. Okay, so shchitasai, it's slaughtering. Usrikas damai, it's sprinkling, or it's throwing of the blood. Now, the things we're going to be mentioning, without going into detail, are things you typically can't do on Shabbos. Nonetheless, these parts of the carbon Pesach, because they are part of the carbon Pesach, they will override Shabbos. So shchitasai, it's slaughtering. Usrikas damai, it's throwing of the blood. Umichui kravav. Michui krava means washing out the intestines. Now, the intestines are washed out because the intestines were actually eaten. They're edible. They're like the meat, right? Kishka. Okay? And so the intestines were eaten. If you did not do a rinsing or a cleaning out of the intestines, they would spoil. So therefore, they need to be rinsed out. Okay? The hektar chalavav, and the offering of its fats. Okay, these are all things that the Torah says you are to do on the 14th of Pesach, meaning when you slaughter it, right? You cannot slaughter it a day before the 14th. You cannot slaughter it after the 14th. It has to be done on the 14th. Therefore, it's going to override Shabbos. The same thing, the sprinkling of the blood has a specific time that needs to be done. And therefore, even if it's Shabbos, it's going to be done. I'm going to skip the washing out of the intestines for a second. The offering of the fats, these are all parts of the actual service of the sacrifice. They all have to be done on Erev Pesach. So even if Erev Pesach is Shabbos, it's got to be done. Now, the Minchui Krov of the rinsing out of the intestines is really not part of the service. It's not part of the Avodah. Nonetheless, we still say to override Shabbos, because if you wait, right, till after Shabbos to do it, as I said before, the intestines could spoil. And therefore, it needs to be done right away. Mm-hmm. It's not something you can wait till after Shabbos to do. You got to do it right away. And therefore, it's permissible to do. Now, avol tzliyasai, but the roasting of it, v'hadochas karavav, and the rinsing of the intestines that you do after that initial one. There's one that you have, there's a one, like I call it a big one, right? It cleans out most of the waste. And once you've done that, it's not going to go ahead and spoil. But there's still another rinsing that's done, a second rinsing that's done. That's my understanding. A second rinsing that's done to get out what's left over. That amount that's left over after the first washing is not going to cause anything to spoil. And therefore, you have to wait till after Shabbos to do. So when it talks about Shabbos, when it comes to the roasting, when it comes to washing out the intestines, they don't override Shabbos. They're going to have to be done. They could be done after Shabbos, and therefore, they need to be done after Shabbos. Even though typically you roast the carbon Pesach, Erev Pesach, so you can eat it on the night of Pesach. When it comes out that Shabbos was Erev Pesach, you're going to have to start later because you first have to roast it on after Shabbos. Now, Har Kavasai.
The second washing of the intestines, you do that on Yom Tov instead of Shabbos.
I mean on Yom Tov.
It's Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov.
I'm not sure what you're saying. Shabbos is Erev Yom Tov.
Right.
So you don't do it on Shabbos, you do it after Shabbos.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So both the roasting and the second washing, let's call it the washing after the first initial one. Okay, those are not override Shabbos. Now, har kavasai means it's carrying the animal. Or if you had to bring it from outside the Tchum Shabbos. Okay, bring it outside the Tchum Shabbos. Now, don't forget, Erev Pesach is Shabbos. And therefore, if we're talking about Shabbos, carrying it will be a problem of carrying, right? Especially if you got to carry it through Rosh Hashanah, public domain, in order to get it here. If, let's say, it was outside of the Tchum, it's outside of your residence for Shabbos, which we say you can't go more than 2,000 cubits outside of your residence for Shabbos. Let's say that's what the animal is. Okay, you got to bring it. Cutting off a yabelis. A yabelis is translated as a wart. And a wart is a mum, it's a blemish. It actually invalidates the animal to be your carbon. But you can cut off the wart and make it kosher again. And it can be, so let's say you need to do that. Let's say your carbon Pesach develops a wart. You need to cut it off, but it's Erev Shabbos. It's Shabbos, it's Erev Pesach. Ein doichen es HaShabbos. These things cannot override Shabbos. The reason is because all these things could have been done before Shabbos. It could have been done before Shabbos. You need to get your act together and make sure to bring it before Shabbos, not on Shabbos, right? You need to bring it on Shabbos. You need to go ahead and bring it before Shabbos, whether it be through a public domain, or it be from outside the Tchum, to cut off the wart. All these things can be done before Shabbos, and therefore, since they can be done before Shabbos, although these are all things that allow you to do the mitzvah, nonetheless, when they could be done before Shabbos, Shabbos, they will not override Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer says, they do override Shabbos. This is because Rabbi Eliezer has an opinion that's brought down in Mishna Shabbos, in which Rabbi Eliezer says, Machshirei mitzvah, the things that you need to perform a mitzvah can also override Shabbos. So if the mitzvah itself overrides Shabbos, the machshir, the things that you do to enable you to do the mitzvah, can also override Shabbos, even if they could have been done before Shabbos. Therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says they are doicha, but the halacha, I believe, is not that way. The halacha is like the Tanakh, the Chachamim, that you actually have to do it before anything that could have been before Shabbos, has to be done before Shabbos and not be done on Shabbos itself. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.